Please. Save my baby. Begged the single mom. But when the millionaire looked into her eyes, everything changed. Please. My baby. He's seizing. Teresa Carter's desperate plea cut through the roar of the rain and the distant thunder that echoed in the marble-hushed entrance of the Manhattan restaurant. At 9 p.m. The city was caught between two worlds, shimmering warmth inside and a ruthless, biting cold outside. The wind sliced through her threadbare coat, a flimsy apology against the chill. She knelt on the slick pavement, clutching Lucas, her golden-haired 2-year-old, his lips turning a terrifying shade of purple, his small body shaking uncontrollably against her trembling arms. Help me. She sobbed into the storm, her voice nearly lost in the gale, her blonde hair plastered to her face. She felt utterly powerless, watching his small chest spasm beneath the thin layer of her coat. Inside, well-dressed diners sipped wine under soft, amber lighting, completely unaware of the life-or-death struggle happening only steps away. The wheels of a sleek black SUV rolled to a silent stop at the curb. Michael Bennett, 33, tech CEO and self-made billionaire, sat inside. His tailored black suit and crisp white shirt betrayed no warmth. A perfect uniform for a man who commanded boardrooms, not chaos. With one last click on a luxury dining app, he was preparing to step out, to head home, to leave this damp, forgotten street to its shadows. His phone buzzed with post-meeting messages demanding his attention. He raised his hand, expecting the driver's window to descend on command, when a frantic sound tore him from his routine. A woman's scream. He hesitated. A rare pause in his meticulously scheduled life. He peered sideways through the rain-streaked window. There, kneeling on the curb, was a young woman clutching a child. The child's limbs trembled violently, and the mother's voice shook with a terror that cut deeper than any winter chill. The woman locked eyes with him and stumbled forward, rapping desperately on the SUV's window. Her voice trembled, raw with panic. Please, sir, help my baby. He's dying. I have no car. No one else is stopping. Michael's hand hovered over the button to roll down the window. He stared silently, a flicker of weariness behind his calm facade. Is this a scam? Are you trying to set me up? He asked, his tone detached and clipped. Please. I swear I'm not a thief. Teresa's voice cracked as she shook in the downpour. My son. Look at him. Just look. Michael's gaze dropped to the child slumped against his mother's chest. Lucas's face, contorted in agony, struck him with a jarring, unwelcome clarity. He saw flashes of himself at that age, same golden hair, same helpless terror. The memory stabbed him. Warm and cruel, his own mother. Broken and silent under a stark hospital light, begging for a help he could never summon in time. In that instant, Michael acted. The fortress he had built around his heart cracked. He pushed the SUV door open and stepped out into the rain. Water immediately soaked his expensive suit. But he moved without hesitation. He gave his driver a curt command. Open the back seat. Now. The driver obeyed silently as Teresa sobbed. Her posture crumpled against the cold. Michael knelt beside her, gently shifting Lucas from her arms into his own. His voice was low, Commanding yet surprisingly soft. Get in. Quickly. We're going to the hospital. Teresa lifted her head. Her tear-streaked face shining with a fragile glimmer of hope. Without a word, she entrusted her son to his care. Michael held the boy close to his chest as the rain continued its quiet assault on their shared, desperate moment. She climbed in after them, collapsing into the plush leather seat. Lucas whimpered softly against Michael's chest. The billionaire CEO slid in beside them and barked directions to the driver before turning to Teresa. Stay calm. We'll get him help. As the SUV pulled away from the restaurant, the golden lights of the city blurred into streaks through the rain. Inside the vehicle, Teresa wrapped her arms protectively around Lucas, leaning into the stranger who had become his savior. Michael, sleeves soaked and heart pounding with an unfamiliar rhythm, stared straight ahead at the slick, unforgiving streets. He remembered a promise he had made to himself years ago, to never again let fear stop him from doing what was right. Now, he was face to face with the reason behind that vow. A son he had long forgotten he could love again. The ambulance doors closed behind them. In the stark, sterile waiting area of the ER, Teresa sat on a hard plastic chair, Lucas limp in her lap, his tiny body now heavy with exhaustion. The sleek SUV stood just outside, its headlights half blinded by the wet glass. Teresa pressed her forehead gently against Lucas's temple and whispered into the fabric of his damp hoodie, her voice trembling. I lost my job last week. No health insurance. No safety net. I don't know what we'll do now. She glanced up, tear tracks still warm on her cheeks, and found Michael standing by the reception desk, arms crossed. His suit was soaked and his usually immaculate hair was slicked down by the rain. He looked imposing and distant, every bit the commanding tech CEO she'd seen on magazine covers. Not the man who had cradled her son just hours ago. A doctor in scrubs approached, her expression professional but tired. MS. Carter. I'm Dr. Morgan. I need to explain Lucas's condition. Teresa steadied herself. It's pneumonia. And it's severe. He has a high fever and is showing early signs of sepsis. We need to admit him immediately and start intravenous antibiotics. The doctor's voice softened with practiced sympathy. Unfortunately, the treatment is costly. The hospital requires payment arrangements before we can begin. Teresa's breath caught in her chest. I don't have insurance. She croaked, unable to finish the sentence. Lucas began to stir, whimpering softly, and she instinctively rocked him. Dr. Morgan offered a sympathetic nod. We'll give you some time to make arrangements. As the doctor walked away, Teresa sank further into her seat, clutching Lucas as if he was the only anchor she had left in the world. Michael remained by the counter, silent, observing the flurry of nurses and worried parents. He had offered a ride. But what now? He hadn't spoken a word since the doctor's announcement. Minutes felt like hours. Teresa unwrapped Lucas's small hand, sliding her thumb between his fingers. He shivered. She blew warm air across his forehead. Finally, he began to cry again. Not from fever, but from fear. The panic that had gripped her heart years ago returned with a force that nearly knocked her to her knees. She turned to Michael, her voice shaking. I can't pay for this. I can't. Michael stepped forward, pulling a black credit card from the breast pocket of his wetsuit coat. He laid it flat on the desk in front of the admissions nurse, who was completing their forms. "Run everything on this. Treat him like he's my own child." The nurse looked startled, but she registered the undeniable weight behind his words. She nodded and quickly began processing the admission. Teresa stared at the card. Her tears came again, the emotional dam finally breaking. "Why? Why would someone like you do this for someone like me?" Her voice was a whisper, raw and breathless. "I don't even know your name." Michael didn't smile. He was too solemn for that. But he turned to face her. And his eyes, so often cool and reserved, held something tender. "My name is Michael Bennett," he said softly. "And you don't need to know my name to know this. That child in your arms needed someone who could act. So I will." A nurse gently took Lucas to be prepped for his room. And Teresa stood to watch him go. She turned back to Michael, her voice thick. "I don't know how to thank you." He offered a slight nod. "There's no thanks needed," he said quietly. Then he paused. "Stay here. I'll be right back." Teresa watched him walk toward the other side of the ward. He spoke quietly with another hospital administrator, handing over an authorization form. When he returned, he looked calmer, more resolute. He slid a small bag with toiletries and a fresh change of clothes for her across the counter. "This might help until things are settled." She reached out and accepted it, her thumbs trembling over the clasp. "Thank you." Her voice cracked again. But this time, the tears were different, not from fear, but from a fragile, burgeoning hope. Michael gave a small, respectful nod. "He's going to be okay." As he stepped away into the shadowed corridor, Teresa looked down at Lucas's sleeping face. The harsh hospital light seemed to soften around them. In the distance, she heard Michael's voice, speaking politely with another nurse, making sure every detail was in order. And for the first time that night, she believed it. The bar was quiet. Too quiet for a man who had spent most of his life in the clamor of boardrooms and corner offices. Michael sat alone at a dimly lit table, a single glass of scotch in front of him, untouched. The late-night glare of neon signs seeped through the window, casting ribbons of light across his lapel. He stared at the amber liquid, tracing its slow, circular motions with a distant gaze. Each swirl returned him to another night. Years ago. His mother, gaunt and pale, lay on a narrow hospital bed under harsh fluorescent lights. The doctor's words still echoed in his mind, "We can't treat her unless you pay now. No insurance." Michael had been 9 years old. He had clutched his mother's hand, heard her whisper, "I will be okay, baby." Even as her breathing grew shallow, he remembered clutching a handful of dollar bills he had folded with childish care, hoping they could somehow heal what money couldn't. They couldn't. He had left that hospital with an empty space where his mother used to be and a cold, hard resolve in his heart. Never again would money fail someone in his care. The scotch sat untouched as he remembered the choices he made after that day. He had married success, climbed ladder after ladder, building an empire on his sheer brilliance and resolve. Love, sentiment, vulnerability, those were weaknesses he could not afford. Success required certainty. not heart. It demanded a fortress of control. There was no room in that fortress for a child's laughter, for a nurse's quiet prayer, or for a woman's tear-streaked face under a rain-soaked sky. There was only him and the relentless pulse of profit. Tonight, the fortress walls shook. Because when he looked at the sleeping form of Lucas, he glimpsed a courage he had never known. Because when Teresa's voice cracked with exhaustion but still begged for help, he realized he cared enough to act. He cared enough to stop. Something in him craved the stillness that followed the storm outside that hospital. He picked up the glass and drank. The scotch bit with heat. But it wasn't enough to numb him. It inflamed something. A question. A crack in the relentless logic he had always relied on. What had he been living for? Success. Awards. Board approvals. He shook his head and drained the glass in one gulp. Then he swept the scotch aside. A decidedly final gesture. Tonight, this fortress would be tested. He remembered the weight of tiny Lucas in his arms as Teresa had settled into a chair. He saw how terrified she was, but also how her golden hair clung to her face in damp strands that framed her desperation and fierce determination. She was scared, but not broken. He respected that. He admired it. He thought of all the mothers he had ignored during his climb, the ones too stressed to watch their children laugh, too overworked to listen to giggles before bed. He had convinced himself that real problems were hard numbers on balance sheets, not heartbeats in hospital beds. But tonight, after watching Lucas's pulse steady, after seeing the hope in Teresa's eyes, he knew something profound had shifted. He thought of the credit card he'd placed on the desk, the words he'd quietly said. Treat him like he's my own. Those words felt heavier, more meaningful than any board approval he had ever given. They were a decision and a risk. They meant everything. But there was fear, too. What if helping one golden-haired woman and her trembling son unraveled the carefully constructed world he had built? What if emotion was a liability he no longer wished to bear? He stretched and ran a hand through his hair, slick and cut like corporate armor. In that moment, he realized he was tired. Tired of the fortress. Tired of pretending that love wasn't a necessary expense. He drained the glass again and set it on the bar. He left enough money to cover the drink and a generous tip. Then stood. He walked to the mirror behind the bar and met his own eyes. A man wearing power and wealth like a shield, but haunted by the memory of his mother dying alone, by a child's tremor under the rain. He had chosen success to prevent that moment from ever repeating. But maybe now, success meant something more than profit. He turned and pushed through the bar's glass door into the cold night air. The rain hit him like a baptism. And for the first time, he welcomed it. Tonight, he would return to the hospital. Tonight, he would see Teresa. He would see Lucas. Because despite the cold he had buried deep inside himself, something warm had broken through. And he did not intend to let it slip away. It was the third morning since Lucas's admission. And every day, Michael found himself returning to the same children's ward that, in just a few days, had become the most important place in his life. The hospital's fluorescent lights no longer felt harsh. Somewhere in these sterile white halls, he'd rediscovered a part of himself he hadn't felt in years. He entered Lucas's room to find the boy sitting up in bed, surrounded by a menagerie of plush toys. Michael had brought cookies, a board game, And 2 comic books. Lucas's face lit up. Uncle Michael. He squealed, leaping off the bed and into his arms. Michael chuckled, lowering them both to the floor. Hey, buddy. Feeling better? Better. Because you came. The simple words hit Michael harder than he expected. He helped Lucas unwrap a cookie, wiped a few crumbs from his cheek, then opened a comic book and began to read. Lucas followed along, his eyes wide, turning the pages with careful little fingers. At the doorway, Teresa stood watching. She looked tired and worn, but calmer, more grounded. Her eyes lingered on Michael as he sat cross-legged on the hospital floor, with Lucas curled up beside him. She saw a man who could have been anywhere in the world, but chose to be here. Lucas grinned. Uncle Michael. Will you play Legos with me? Michael nodded. Sure. Teach me how to build that castle. They built side by side, laughing when the structure wobbled. Needs a bigger base, Lucas said with the authority of a master builder. Michael smiled. We'll redesign it together. From across the room, Teresa smiled faintly. Lucas noticed and whispered, Mommy's watching. Michael glanced up and gave her a warm nod. She returned it with quiet gratitude. Later, as Michael stood to stretch, he asked, Want something from the cafeteria? Cookies or apple juice? Apple juice. He left and wandered the halls, his thoughts circling. In the cafeteria, he picked up the juice and a coffee for Teresa. For a moment, he remembered his mother. How she might have wanted someone to sit beside her in a place like this, to bring her a simple comfort. When he returned, he handed Lucas the juice, then noticed Teresa had moved closer. She gave him a soft, Thank you. You don't need to thank me, he said. I like being here. I noticed. You're here every day. He's a fighter, Michael replied, his gaze on Lucas. So I'm here. She sat beside them as Lucas munched happily. It means a lot, she whispered. Michael looked at her, his voice quiet. He means a lot to me. To us, she said, almost inaudibly. They played, read, and laughed through the next hour. Lucas built a lopsided tower. Michael helped stabilize it. Teresa joined in, her exhaustion fading as she sat closer. Later, as the visitors thinned out, Teresa spoke. I can't thank you enough, but I want to help you somehow. Michael shook his head. You're doing everything just by being his mother. I don't know how to repay you. Michael looked at her. No hesitation now. Stay, he said simply. Stay with us. Lucas looked up from his Lego tower and said, Uncle Michael, you break all my walls. Michael swallowed, meeting Teresa's eyes over their son's head. His walls, once built of cold, hard success, were crumbling. And in their place, something warmer, stronger, was growing. Rain tapped softly at the windows. And for the first time, a different kind of future felt possible. A future chosen. Together. Michael awoke to the insistent buzz of notifications on his phone. Stock alerts. Retweets. News updates headlines growing louder by the minute. He slid on his suit jacket and walked out onto the balcony of his penthouse. The glittering lights of New York spread out beneath him. That's when he felt the tremor. Not in the ground, but in the foundation of his world. His phone lit up, delivering a notification that would change everything. Tech billionaire Michael Bennett caught in secret romance with single waitress. The headline declared across multiple tabloids and business outlets. The article featured a grainy photograph, Michael cradling a sick child outside a hospital, the mother weeping beside them. It was an intimate moment. One of shared hope and responsibility. Now torn from its context and twisted into a scandal. The image swept across media channels. The stock ticker for Bennett Technologies plunged. His world shook. Within an hour, his phone was ringing non-stop. His board of directors demanded answers. His assistant buzzed with panic. Michael pressed the phone to his ear and walked downstairs. The sterile hospital becoming a refuge from the storm he now faced. He hated that this scandal had dragged him from the most important bedside in the world. He found Teresa sitting on a bench outside Lucas's room. Her head in her hands. She looked like a ghost, thin, overexposed, shrouded in stress and heartache. He took a breath and sat beside her. "What happened?" he asked quietly. She shook her head, not looking at him. "I don't know. It got leaked online after someone took photos." He pulled up the article on his phone and scrolled. They had even spliced in quotes from their private conversations. "My son. I lost my job last week. Can't pay." They framed it as a scandalous manipulation. As if she had orchestrated the entire thing. He slammed the phone onto the bench beside him. "Did you use me?" he asked. His voice low and dangerous. "Did you do this on purpose? Did someone pay you to drag me into the media?" Tears streamed down Teresa's cheeks as she looked at him. Her expression one of pure disbelief. "No. No. Michael. I thought you were different. I never wanted publicity. I swear. I never asked for anything except your help for Lucas." He stood to leave. The walls of his fortress rebuilding themselves brick by brick. "Then why are we trending?" "I don't know," she cried, standing to face him. "I swear. What I told you was real. Our son was dying. I needed help. I thought you were different." Michael's face hardened. His estranged siblings had once called him cold. And in that moment, he became colder still. "I will not let you drag me into a scandal," he said, his voice brittle. "I will not be a showpiece for the world." Teresa wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold herself together. "I just wanted you to know the truth." He narrowed his gaze. The hurt and confusion warring with years of practiced self-preservation. "I thought you were someone I could trust." Another crisis. Another betrayal. The words hung in the air. Sharp and cruel. Her tears flowed freely now. "I'm sorry. He cut her off. "Save your apologies." Then he turned and walked away. His footsteps heavy. Leaving Teresa trembling in the empty hospital corridor. He got into a slow elevator. Descending back to the street. Away from the hope and the danger he once believed he had found in her arms. Michael drove through the night. Adrenaline and shame colliding within him. By 2 a.m. The media frenzy hadn't cooled. By 3 a.m. Even legitimate news outlets were questioning whether his philanthropic gesture was genuine, or if his heart had been used as a plaything. He realized that in trying to help, he had exposed himself, his legacy, his company, his vulnerability. But at 6 a.m., with the sun rising cold and gray over the Hudson, he knew he couldn't back out. This wasn't a transaction. Not anymore. Before dawn, he was back outside the hospital. Phone silenced. Waiting. Inside the ward, Teresa gently rubbed Lucas's forehead. His fever had finally broken, but he still slept deeply. Clouds of relief and uncertainty hovered in her mind. She didn't know if Michael would return. If the man she'd come to trust, the one who'd brought light into her darkest days, would stand by them. She hadn't slept. She thought she might have hallucinated his footsteps in the hallway earlier. Now, those footsteps approached again. Real and certain. And there he was. Michael. He stopped at the doorway, his face etched with exhaustion and regret. He asked, his voice quiet and rough, "Can I come in?" Tears filled her eyes, and she simply nodded. "We do this," he said, stepping into the room. "On our terms. Not as a headline. Not as a piece of gossip. Understand?" She nodded again, her hand flying to his arm as if to make sure he was real. Michael knelt beside the bed, brushing a hand through Lucas's hair and squeezing Teresa's shoulder. "Lucas doesn't need a headline. He needs us. I choose to be here." And that night, without any more words, they found their footing again together. Real. And unbreakable. Lucas walked out of Franklin Regional Medical Center that afternoon, his small hand tightly curled around his mother's finger. The hospital lights glowed behind them as Teresa paused at the automatic doors, hugging her coat tighter. Lucas no longer trembled. His fever was gone. His cough had all but subsided. Still, the memory of that night, his tiny body struggling for air, was etched into her mind with painful clarity. In the weeks that followed, Teresa packed their meager belongings and found refuge in a modest two-bedroom apartment in Stamford, Connecticut. It was a quiet place, far from the ceaseless buzz of New York City, where the tabloids had splashed Michael Bennett's name across every front page. She found work waiting tables at a small diner on the edge of town, early shifts, late shifts, whatever she could get. The pay was minimal, but it was honest. It meant they could start again, on their own terms. Each evening, after Lucas was asleep, Teresa would sit at the small wooden desk by the window and open his spiral notebook. Inside were dozens of drawings he'd made in the hospital and in the quiet days after. They were all pictures of Daddy Michael and Mommy Teresa, standing under a bright yellow sun, with hearts drawn all around them. And always, Lucas sandwiched happily between them. His letters were wobbly but sweet: Daddy Michael and Mommy Teresa, love forever. Every night, she would trace the crayon lines with her finger and feel a bittersweet ache in her chest. If only she could believe those words fully again. She had stopped returning Michael's calls and messages. He was a kind man who had stepped in when she needed help. But the media scandal had shattered her fragile world. She told herself she was protecting Lucas, that the chaos couldn't touch them if she pushed it all away for good. Her first few shifts at the diner were a blur of coffee pots, order slips, and clinking dishes. Every time she saw her name on the screen of the register, she was reminded of how far they had come, and how close they'd come to falling apart. No customers recognized her. No one asked about the scandal in Manhattan. Stamford didn't want her story. It simply let her be invisible. That, at least, was peaceful. But the nights were harder. After Lucas fell asleep, she would stare out the window at the distant city skyline, wondering what Michael was doing. She caught herself imagining his face, stern and weathered. The same face that had once softened so completely when he held her son. She wondered if he still thought of them. Lucas would sometimes wake, calling for Daddy Michael in his dreams. Teresa would hold him tight, her heart breaking all over again. She wanted to believe he would come back. But every phone call she declined, every text she left unanswered, felt like another nail in Hope's coffin. Work became a routine, but she struggled to focus. Her arms ached from carrying trays, her feet bruised from standing all day. As she filled orders at the counter one night, she paused, her hands shaking around the coffee carafe. Her friend and coworker, Janet, watched with concern. "You okay?" Janet asked softly. Teresa nodded. "Just tired," she replied. "A long day." But she was tired of more than that. She was tired of being afraid. But she didn't know how to stop. Then came the nights when Lucas would draw again before bed. "Mommy, can I show you?" he would ask, holding up a fresh page. And there they were again, a tall man, a golden-haired mother, and a smiling child. She would hug him close. "That's beautiful, baby." And she would tuck him in, whispering, "I love you more than anything." Alone, with the notebook open before her, she would stare at the images and the crooked letters, Daddy Michael and Mommy Teresa. Love forever. The kitchen light flickered as she closed the notebook and pursed her lips. Did she want that forever? Or was it still just a drawing? She didn't know. She just knew Lucas needed more than shadows. He needed answers. And so did she. It was nearly midnight when Michael's phone buzzed with an urgent ring. Half asleep, he glanced at the caller ID and felt his heart seize. Hospital emergency. The hallucinatory blur of his quiet, empty penthouse vanished as adrenaline surged through him. He grabbed his keys, threw on a coat, and bolted out of the apartment. Outside, rain had begun to fall again. A familiar, oppressive patter that mirrored his inner turmoil. He didn't hesitate. He slammed the car door, fumbled in the dark, and raced toward the highway. The black SUV, waiting like a loyal sentinel, roared to life. And the highway swallowed him whole. All that mattered was one name, Lucas. The hospital corridors were hushed, bathed in a pale, sterile light. Nurse Patterson, a kind woman with a lined face, stood near the door of a private room. Concern etched in her expression. She saw Michael enter. Breathless. "She wouldn't call you," she said softly, referring to Teresa. "But the boy. He calls for you every night." Michael swallowed hard and nodded. His jaw clenched. He didn't ask why she hadn't called. He already knew. He pushed forward toward the door. Inside. The scene broke his heart. Teresa sat slumped beside the bed. Exhaustion weighing on her as thick as the silence. She held Lucas's hand lightly. Fresh tears glittering on her cheeks. Lucas lay asleep in the hospital bed. Tubes attached. His small chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. He had suffered another seizure. A complication from his previous battle with pneumonia. Michael paused at the threshold. The woman he had abandoned stood there. Battered by fatigue and grief. But his son was in trouble again. Their eyes met. Teresa's gaze was locked on the bed. She hadn't turned away when he walked in. But she hadn't looked at him either. Silence hung over them like a thick curtain. Michael took a step forward and draped a warm hospital blanket over them both. "I'm sorry," he whispered. His voice just loud enough for her. "I was a coward. But not anymore." Teresa's head jerked up. Her expression a painful mix of relief and disbelief. She blinked back tears. Reacting to the raw vulnerability in his tone. Michael knelt beside the bed. He took Lucas's free hand in his own and closed his eyes for a moment. "I'm here now. Little man," he murmured. "You're not alone. Not anymore." Lucas stirred but didn't wake. Teresa reached over and brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. She met Michael's gaze. The floodgates of suppressed pain cracking wide open. "I thought I lost him," she said in a broken whisper. "I thought that night was the end." Michael's eyes glistened. "You weren't alone then. And I won't let you be alone now. I won't walk away again." She closed her eyes. Leaning forward to press her forehead against his arm. He slid an arm around her shoulders. Enfolding mother and son in a shaky, protective embrace. Time stretched. Teresa drifted into a half-sleep. Leaning on Michael's chest. Her tears finally drying on her cheeks. He felt every breath she took in that stark hospital room. With the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the sterile scent of antiseptic. They were raw and exposed. But they were together. The night guard stepped in for a brief check-in. Finding them locked in that quiet embrace. "I'll grab you coffee if you want," he offered kindly. Michael nodded. Managing a stiff smile. As he stood to wait. Teresa let out a soft breath and stood on shaky legs. She cleared her throat. "Thank you," she said. Just 2 words. But they were full of meaning. Michael met her eyes. "No more running," he said. "This time. I'll stay." She nodded once. "He needs you." He nodded back. "And so do you." Morning light seeped through the curtains. Teresa gazed at Lucas, who was now sleeping peacefully. Michael stood behind her. His hands resting gently on her shoulders. Neither had spoken much overnight. The crisis that had loomed in the darkness had passed. But its echo remained. She turned in his arms. "Can we?" He interrupted her with a soft kiss on her forehead. "Yes," he said. "We can. Together." They stepped forward to meet the day. Ready to heal the wounds their separate tragedies had left behind. The morning in Hartford, Connecticut was crisp and bright as Michael and Teresa stepped onto a stage. Flanked by media lights and cameras. Behind them, a large banner read, "The New Beginnings Foundation, supporting single mothers and their children." Lucas, in a tiny suit with suspenders, clutched a polished wooden box at their feet. Michael adjusted his tie, gently placing a hand on Teresa's back. She took a deep breath and faced the crowd. The press release had just gone out. Michael Bennett, the once unreachable tech mogul, would be the foundation's lead sponsor. Teresa Carter, survivor and mother, would serve as its co-director. This was not a publicity stunt. It was their purpose. Michael stepped to the mic first. "We're not here because of a headline," he began, his voice clear and firm. "We're here because of what we've lived. A story of courage, of love, and of the fundamental need for no family to ever feel alone in a hospital hallway." He glanced at Teresa. "She doesn't need saving. I did. I needed her compassion, her strength, her truth." He stepped back. Teresa took the mic, her golden hair catching the morning light. "I wasn't looking for a hero," she said, her voice steady and sure. "Just someone who believed in us. And he did. That changed everything." Applause erupted. Michael squeezed her hand. Lucas raised his box with a proud grin, drawing more smiles from the crowd. Weeks later, on a sun-drenched afternoon, a small chapel near the Connecticut River came alive with music and laughter. White roses lined the aisle. Guests, foundation staff, close friends, and the very nurses who had once saved Lucas filled the pews. Lucas, in his ring-bearer suit, clutched a velvet box holding the wedding bands. Michael stood at the altar, his heart full. When Teresa appeared in an ivory lace gown, the sunlight catching in her hair, his breath caught. Her smile was soft, her step sure. She carried a bouquet of wildflower sunflowers, blue delphinium, and white roses. The officiant began. "We are gathered here today to witness a new beginning. Proof that love finds us, even in the darkest of storms." Michael and Teresa met at the center. Lucas handed them the rings with solemn pride. They placed them on each other's fingers, then turned toward him. Together, they each took one of his small hands into theirs. "I now pronounce you a family," the officiant said with a warm smile. "Michael, Teresa, and Lucas, may your love build a home stronger than any one of you could build alone." They kissed. Guests cheered. Outside on the lawn, a vintage convertible waited. They climbed in, Michael at the wheel, Teresa beside him, and Lucas perched safely on the back seat between them. Later, parked in a quiet grove by the river, they stepped into the soft grass. The sky was painted pink with the fading gold of sunset. Michael knelt, looking up at the two people who had changed his life forever. "Your courage saved all three of us," he told Teresa, his voice full of emotion. He turned to Lucas. "And you, little man, you built this family out of love." Lucas beamed, his pride glowing. Teresa leaned in and whispered, "And your heart finally found its home." Michael stood, pulling her close. He lifted Lucas into his arms. Together they stood a family. Imperfect but whole. Scarred but fearless. Their new beginning wasn't about grand gestures anymore. It was about quiet evenings reading comic books, shared laughter over a lopsided Lego tower, and the simple, Profound peace of knowing you are exactly where you are supposed to be. As they walked hand in hand through the meadow toward their new life. Somewhere between the shadows of Stamford and the lights of Manhattan. Their story became more than survival. It became a testament, when a mother cries, "Please help my baby." And love listens. Miracles follow. Always. Because sometimes, what begins with a single cry in the night can echo into a lifetime of healing. Sometimes, the strongest families are the ones we choose. And sometimes, even a man who thought he had everything finds out what truly matters through the eyes of a child. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the quiet power of showing up for someone else, we invite you to like, share, and most importantly, subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories. Here, we believe that every heart has a story worth telling. And that the right story at the right time can change everything. Until next time, keep believing in love, in second chances, and in the people who never stop choosing you.